You ever had a neighbor so entitled they thought your property was theirs? Well, mine didn't just cross the line, she stole my water. And when I confronted her, she laughed in my face. So I decided if she wanted my hose so bad, I'd give her something she'd never forget. What happened next? Let's just say it left the entire neighborhood gagging. Hit that subscribe button because this story gets nastier than you think. The sound of running water cut through the silence like a whisper in a church, and I froze, halfway through deadheading a rosebush I had planted in memory of my wife. I looked up. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, amber hue over my garden. But that sound, it was wrong, out of place. Steady and strong, like a faucet left open, I dropped. The shears wiped my hands on my jeans and followed it toward the back fence. Something in my gut twisted before I even saw it, and when I did, my mouth went dry. There it was. My green garden hose coiled over the fence like a snake and slithering right into the yard next door. I stepped onto a small ladder, leaned over, and there she was. Kerren, her bleach blonde bob glistened under her patio lights as she stood with a drink in one hand and my hose in the other. Water was gushing into a kiddie pool while her dog barked and chased the stream. She looked up, saw me, smiled, then turned away like I was a gust of wind and not a man watching his property being stolen in plain sight. I climbed down, pulse pounding. It wasn't just the hose or the water or even the entitlement. It was the fact that this woman had fined me $50 last week for having a cracked garden. Gnome. A cracked gnome. She was the HOA vice president. Kerren was the queen of the cul-de-sac, the self-declared sheriff of suburbia. And now, she was stealing from me like it was her God-given right. I marched around the fence and knocked hard on her door. She opened it with a raised brow and a smug smile like she'd been expecting me. "Can I help you?" "That's my hose, Kerren," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced back as if she'd forgotten and said, "Oh, is it? I thought it was community water access for HOA beautification projects." "Beautification?" I echoed. "Yes," she said. "I'm hosting the summer meeting next week. My lawn needs to look exceptional. You're using my water, Kerren." She sipped her drink, slow, deliberate. "It's just water, don't be petty. Besides, you live alone. It's not like you're using that much." The way she said it, alone, like it was a weakness, like it meant I didn't count. "Unplug the hose, Kerren," I said. She stared at me like I was speaking Latin. Then, without a word, she stepped back, pulled the hose out with a flick of her wrist, and let it slap onto my side of the fence. The door closed in my face. That night I sat on the porch listening to the crickets and the wind rustling the trees, and I felt small, defeated. It wasn't just the theft, it was the dismissal. The way she'd looked right through me. My garden was my sanctuary after Emily passed. I'd spent hours there every week, pulling weeds, planting flowers, building something alive from all the grief I couldn't bury. Every hydrangea was a memory. Every tulip, a prayer. That hose was more than rubber and plastic. It was connection. The next morning, I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA detailing the theft with photos and timestamps. I printed everything and slid it into the HOA mailbox at the clubhouse. 3 days later, I got a letter on HOA letterhead with Kerren's signature at the bottom. "Your complaint has been reviewed and deemed frivolous. Please refrain from further harassment of board members." Harassment. They called it harassment. I stood there in my front yard holding that letter while the sprinklers hissed around me, and the laughter from Kerren's backyard floated over the fence like a taunt. That night I heard the water again, a soft, steady hiss just past midnight. I threw on a hoodie and crept outside, flashlight in hand, heart thumping. The hose was gone again. Gate was latched, but I knew I walked to the side of the house, climbed onto the ladder, and peeked over the fence. Kerren's backyard was dark, but the moon was high and silver, and there, like a glowing thread, was my hose trailing across her patio and into her pool. She had tied it with zip ties this time, and the water was running full blast. I stood there staring, breathing heavy. The injustice sat in my chest like a stone. She had violated my trust again, mocked my grief, laughed in my face, used the very thing that brought me peace as her personal faucet. And she thought she could get away with it, because she was the HOA, because no one would stop her, because people like me didn't fight back. But she was wrong. Dead wrong. I climbed down. Slow. Methodical. No rage this time. Just clarity. Something had shifted. I looked at the empty reel on the wall and then at the old rusted lockbox by the shed where I stored plumbing tools. The wind picked up, carried the faint scent of lavender from Emily's rose bush, and I smiled, not out of joy but purpose. Tomorrow she'd water her roses with more than she bargained for, and for the first time in weeks, I slept like a man with a plan. The lock was stainless steel, thick, unbreakable, or so I thought. I clipped it onto the faucet that morning, with a click that felt final like sealing a vault, and went to work with a strange lightness in my chest. I came home to a soggy driveway and a cheap plastic cap where the lock had been. The lock was gone, the hose was gone, and taped to my front door in perfect alignment was a letter from the HOA. Tampering with community water infrastructure is a direct violation of Article 6 subsection. Immediate compliance required. I stood there in silence. The letter was signed by Kerren. Of course it was. I walked to the side of the house and sure enough the faucet had been stripped clean, not even a scratch where the lock had been pried off, just a fresh smear of peach lipstick on the plastic cap. She was taunting me. I looked over the fence and saw her sun hat bobbing in the garden. She was humming to herself, pruning hydrangeas that looked suspiciously like mine. "Morning, neighbor," she called. Sweetly, "You're trespassing, Kerren." "On what?" she said. "Shared HOA property. You stole my lock." "Correction. I removed a hazard," she said. "It was an eyesore." She turned her back and walked away like the conversation was finished. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just stood there watching the wind ruffle her patio umbrella and imagined what her smug little world would look like upside down. That night I called my brother. He picked up on the second ring groggy. "She's at it again," I said. "Kerren, she replaced the lock with a Barbie cap and reported me to the HOA again." There was silence. Then he said, "Man, you need to do something crazy like hook it to a sewage line or something." He laughed, but I didn't. I stared at the faucet, my mind ticking, like a clock about to chime. I laughed too eventually, but slower, lower, and the idea rooted itself like a seed in good soil. Kerren was untouchable by rules, by logic, by shame. But what about by consequence? 2 days later, Kerren threw a garden party. I wasn't invited, of course, but I saw the signs, the folding chairs, the floral centerpieces, the HOA board members arriving in polos and sundresses. She gave them tours of her flower beds, her lemon tree, her water feature. From my porch, I watched her wave her arms theatrically. "I've created a self-sustaining eco-filter using community water access," she said proudly. Laughter, applause. They all gathered near her pool, which now sparkled with chemical perfection. My green hose lay coiled beside it like a loyal servant. She didn't even hide it anymore. She used it as a prop in her HOA performance, and they all bought it. Later that evening, I approached her again. Calm, measured. "Kerren, we need to talk." She turned with a smirk and held up a finger. "I don't have time for complaints, Alex. Maybe next week. This is about the water." She rolled her eyes. "I'm not stealing your water. I'm repurposing community resources, and if you keep harassing me, I'll file a restraining order." "I'm offering a compromise," I said. She paused, clearly surprised. "I'll pay for the water. I'll split the cost. Just give me access logs and we'll work it out." She chuckled. "Nice try, but there are no logs and you can't prove a thing." She leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper, and, "Between us, you're one violation away from losing garden privileges altogether." Then she patted my shoulder like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. That night I found my tulips crushed, as if someone had stomped through them in a drunken march. The hose was missing again. Another letter from the HOA arrived this time, stating that due to new drought protocols, I was restricted to 2 watering days per week. Kerren's lot was mysteriously exempt. The injustice boiled in my veins. She was choking the life out of my garden, my peace, and doing it with the HOA's rubber stamp. But I didn't yell, didn't write another complaint, didn't knock on her door. I walked to the shed, opened the back, and stared at the old rusted pipe half buried behind a row of shovels and broken pots. It had been part of the septic overflow system from the original property line. Back when the neighborhood still had well water disconnected, yes, but not dismantled. I ran my fingers along the threaded valve, and I smiled. It wasn't anger anymore. It was certainty. The next morning, I tested the line, ran a flush through it, and watched as a slow brown trickle emerged from the spigot on the far end. It worked. I spent the next 2 days crafting a hose identical in color and length to the one Kerren had stolen. I aged the rubber, sprayed it lightly with grass scent, attached a fake brass nozzle that gleamed in the sunlight. Then I hooked it to the septic outlet, disguised the connection under a pile of mulch, and left the other end loosely coiled near the fence. I didn't have to wait long. That night it was gone. Vanished like smoke, replaced by silence and the sound of sprinklers 2 yards over. The next morning I climbed the ladder and peeked over her fence. Kerren was sipping coffee while her lawn soaked in early morning sunlight. The new hose was snaked through her irrigation line, feeding her rose beds, spraying her lemon tree, dripping slowly into her pool. She looked peaceful, content smug. She had no idea, and for once I didn't feel helpless. I felt patient, because now the hose wasn't stealing anything. It was giving something back, and soon it would bloom in full. It started small, a smell barely noticeable at first, like damp earth after rain, but heavier, sourer, lingering in the air like something had gone bad and no one could find it. Kerren ignored it. Of course, she hosted brunches with her patio doors wide open, served egg salad and mimosas while flies danced lazy circles around the edge of her table. Her lemon tree wilted, first leaves curling at the edges, yellowing like old paper. Then the grass browned. Not all of it, just patches forming a strange, uneven mosaic like a disease spreading beneath the surface. Neighbors started whispering. One of the HOA board members, Trish, leaned over the fence one afternoon and asked if Kerren had over-fertilized. Kerren laughed. "No, darling. I use only organic inputs and the community water system." She said it loud enough for me to hear. I was trimming the hedge. I didn't look up, didn't speak. Just clipped methodically, one branch at a time, like nothing in the world was unusual. That night I saw her again, flashlight in hand, kneeling by her pool, sniffing the water like a suspicious sommelier. The next day a bright orange algae bloom spread like a spill across the surface. Her pool guy came twice in 1 week. By the weekend it was drained and taped off with a handwritten sign, "Maintenance in progress." The smell intensified. Not rotten eggs exactly, but close, like moldy cheese or something dead. Just beneath a layer of perfume, it clung to her yard, followed her movements like a ghost. She replaced the hose. I watched from my porch as she stomped to the fence, coiled it up, yanked it hard, and dropped it in a trash bag without even looking. She returned the next day with a new one, bright yellow, professional grade, connected it herself with 2 thick gloves and a suspicious amount of muttering. I wondered if she noticed that no matter what hose she used, the line never changed. I had rerouted the connection underground, under mulch, under brick, under everything, and it was still feeding her system. Only now it wasn't just the flowers and the lawn. She had connected it to her sprinkler heads. Her smart irrigation controller was doing the rest. I didn't need to touch a thing. Her house was poisoning itself. She hosted another HOA meeting on a Sunday afternoon, full turnout. Lemonade stand, barbecue, charcuterie, board the works, and then right in the middle of her speech, the sprinkler clicked on. A fine mist sprayed over her prized garden, and the smell hit them all at once. It wasn't gentle anymore. It was pungent, aggressive, like sewer gas and rotting cabbage boiled together and left in the sun. People recoiled. Some covered their mouths. Others looked at each other in horror. Kerren froze mid-sentence, eyes wide, mouth still shaped around the word beautification. Then the sprinkler hit her right in the face. A sharp, wet mist that left dark spots on her silk blouse and a streak of something unpleasant on her cheek. The crowd fell silent, and then someone gagged. Trish stepped back, fanning herself. "Oh my God, Kerren. What is that, Kerren?" Blinked, wiped her cheek, looked at her fingers, and turned pale. "I don't know," she stammered. "It must be the city water. Smells like a septic tank." Someone muttered. Laughter broke out, short, sharp, disbelieving. Kerren turned on the controller. Shut everything off, but the damage was done. The party dispersed in minutes, plates, half-eaten drinks, abandoned napkins blowing across the yard like debris after a storm. She stood alone by the patio, mouth tight, eyes darting to every window, every door, every neighbor, sat on my porch holding a cup of coffee. We locked eyes. She knew. She didn't have proof. But she knew the next day a plumber came, then another, then a third. I recognized one of them. He used to do storm drains for the city. They brought equipment, snaked lines. Through her foundation opened access panels around the perimeter of her lawn. She was outside the whole time, arms crossed, barking orders, pacing, talking into her phone. Eventually they left, shaking their heads, giving her a folder thick with diagrams and invoices. That night I saw her dragging a trash bag to the curb filled with dead plants, brown clumps leaking black water onto the pavement. She didn't water her lawn the next morning, or the morning after that. The smell slowly faded, but the scars remained, patches of bald earth, broken pipe ends, exposed flower beds stripped bare. She put up a for sale sign on Friday. By Saturday, it had a bright red pending label slapped across it. I heard she was moving across town to a new development, one without, and the irony made me laugh. But the real punchline came the next week. An email blast from the HOA, subject line board vacancy due to unforeseen personal circumstances. Vice President Kerren Thompson has stepped down, effective immediately, applications now open. I didn't apply, didn't need to. I had my garden back, my peace, my hose. No more letters, no more inspections, no more footsteps in the night, just the slow, steady rhythm of sprinklers clicking on at dawn, and the faint scent of lavender where Emily's roses bloomed again without fear. The morning she left, it rained. A soft, gentle drizzle that turned the dust on her driveway into pale streaks and made the for sale sign creak as it swayed in the wind. Kerren stood by the moving truck, arms folded, lips tight, eyes scanning the street, like she was memorizing every detail for a future lawsuit. She didn't look up at my window, but I knew she wanted to. Wanted to say something, wanted to win somehow. But there was nothing left to claim, no audience to charm, no board to manipulate. Only the scent of mildew and lemon cleaner rising from the ruins of her once immaculate yard. She left behind a cracked bird bath and a warped deck chair, and one final letter folded in thirds, tucked under my doormat. I found it hours later, typed all in caps. No greeting, no signature. Just 5 words. You think this is over? I read it twice, then fed it into the shredder without a second thought. But somewhere deep down, a small voice whispered that maybe she wasn't wrong, that maybe this kind of person never really leaves. They linger in bylaws and property records and moldy corners and rusty faucets. Still, I let the thought go and walked into the yard. Emily was pruning the lavender with gloved hands and a calm smile. Her hat was tilted sideways, one of mine. Borrowed with a playful nod. She's gone, I said. I saw, she said. Her car smelled like boiled eggs and regret. We laughed. For the first time in weeks, it felt easy. Natural. The air smelled clean. The grass looked greener. The silence felt earned. Then the email came, a notice from the city. Inspection required, water quality concerns in your zone. Possible contamination reported by former resident. Kerren had filed a complaint before moving out. She was trying to burn the house down on her way out the door. Met the inspector at the curb. He was young, clipboard in hand, polite but firm. We're checking for any illegal connections or environmental hazards, he said. Just routine after a resident raises a flag. I nodded, led him around, back, showed him the hose, the valve, the normal faucet. He tested everything, checked pressure, smelled for gas, and a dye test through the irrigation line. The blue liquid flowed clean. No trace of sewage, no trace of anything except water. He jotted down notes, scribbled a signature. You're all clear, he said. Honestly, your setup's cleaner than most. I thanked him, watched as he drove away, and only then did I open the hidden panel at the edge of the fence. Inside the box was the original valve, still caked with old mud and sediment, disconnected days ago, replaced with a proper line that fed nothing but filtered rainwater into my system. The sewage line had been a decoy, a brilliant, cruel, temporary illusion, a single flush and feed trickle that never lasted longer than a week, enough to rot her, roots enough to stain her pool, but not enough to trace. I had pulled it out the moment she stopped hosting parties. The rest was theater. She danced in her own paranoia, fought shadows that were never there, and in the end, she reported ghosts. The real weapon had never been the sewage. It was the idea of it. The doubt, the panic. The fear that maybe she was not untouchable. That someone had outsmarted her. And worse, made her look foolish in front of her worshippers. The HOA held elections a month later. Didn't run, but I did vote. Trish became president. First order of business, new water usage policy, fair and equal across all lots. Second order, mandatory transparency for any complaints or citations. No anonymous letters allowed. Emily framed the email, the one where Kerren tried to get me investigated. We hung it in the shed right above the new hose, a quiet little trophy. The garden flourished. The roses bloomed deep red like wine. The grass bounced back stronger than ever. Birds returned, so did butterflies, and neighbors started waving again, stopping to chat, asking about the lavender or the compost or where I got my solar path. Light's peace came slowly, but it came one evening. I found a package on the porch. No label, no return address. Inside was a single garden, gnome holding a tiny sign. It read, "Water Thief." The paint was chipped, but the grin was unmistakable. I placed it right at the edge of the yard facing the street, let him stand guard where the old faucet used to be. Emily laughed when she saw it. "You're really not worried she'll come back?" I shook my head. "She already did," I said, "and she lost." For once, the war wasn't about who yelled louder or wrote longer letters or had more friends on the board. It was about patience, precision, and knowing when to step back and let the monster drown in her own moat. I looked at the sky, clear blue sun setting just behind the lemon tree, which was heavy with fruit again. No smell, no weeds, no letters, just silence and victory.